Greetings friends, Mystery here, today to talk about Havoc and Mutators. What are Mutators? For those of you who are uninitiated or unfamiliar with the term, well, Mutators are simply extra negative modifiers that are thrown in addition to a range of other difficulty increasing things in the endgame mode Havoc. So if you haven't ever touched Havoc, you'll have no idea what I'm talking about, excepting a few of these have appeared as event modifiers in the past. And then typically the pattern goes they are wrapped into that Havoc pool afterwards, and they are chosen randomly to add a little bit of spice, or they are intended to add spice to your missions. The way that it works is 2 of these at random from a pool of 4 will be thrown on top of everything else on the mission, and that pool of 4 is rotated every 3 weeks out of a total pool of 10. Although some of these modifiers I haven't seen in months at this point, which makes me question whether or not they still exist at all. So today what we're going to be doing is going over the basics on each of these modifiers. My goal here is twofold. Firstly, I want to prepare you in case you haven't played Havoc, or maybe you have played Havoc and you just don't know the exact specifics of how a certain modifier might work or what it's actually doing when it's in your games. When you walk away, I want you to have complete confidence that what you know about the mechanic is all you can know without going and playing it for yourself. The second thing here is I'm going to be ranking these modifiers, and we're going to be having a larger discussion, including a separate video on what these modifiers really should be, because I'll point out to you at the end here that a lot of them end up being just rehashed versions of the same thing, and it really doesn't add a whole lot to what could be a really interesting and really powerful endgame mode with a lot of variety and challenge for players. And then in that next video, as I alluded to, that'll be later this week, I'll be doing a revamped version, suggesting new modifiers, suggesting a new balance system, because I think this is ultimately where many players will end up, especially if you keep to the game, or where they really should end up if you keep playing the game for hundreds and hundreds of hours. And right now, it just ends up being a boring slog that only the most masochistic of players really want to participate in. So I seek to alleviate that and perhaps put some ideas out there that Fat Shark might be able to draw from in the future. But without further ado here, let's go ahead and begin. We are going to be tackling these modifiers in the order that they were added to the game. And so they were added in, I think, 3 different waves over the course of a year and some change now. The first 4 came with 4, or the first set of modifiers came with 4 modifiers, the first of which is Cranial Corruption. So, Cranial Corruption is a modifier that gives affected enemies a tentacled growth coming out of their head, and this affects all enemies in the game. It can affect both ranged and melee enemies, and for any enemy, it changes their head to an infested armor type, which is quite unique. It actually makes crushers, for instance, who normally have a carapace entire body and head, have an infested armored head, meaning they can take headshot damage, very vulnerable to it, from non-armor penetrating weapons, which I think is a really cool underexplored mechanic. This is obviously not the only thing it does though, because in addition to this, it multiplies their movement speed by 1.25 times, so 25% movement speed increase, and perhaps most importantly of all for our purposes, it's going to make these enemies have immunity to suppression, which is an effect that normally only happens to ranged enemies, and this will completely stop them from being suppressed by that. They can still be staggered, to be clear, so if you do something that would otherwise knock them over or shove them or stun them, that's going to still happen, but they will not be suppressed. They will not be scared by near misses, by large firearms or near explosions, or the suppression effects from something like Zealot's Chorus of Spiritual Fortitude ultimate ability. So that is very dangerous, and I'll point out why here in a second. There is one final thing that happens here, which is that if these enemies are killed by a ranged headshot, then they will explode, and this explosion doesn't deal any damage, but it does have quite a significant knockback. It can throw you around and throw you, off of revives or a contested objective, or even off of a ledge if you're not careful, and they will also throw their nearby enemies, so it can be a good way to kind of disrupt the crowd as well. So that is everything to know about Cranial Corruption. What do I rank it in terms of difficulty? Well, I would rank this difficulty a 3 out of 10 for the mere purpose that this is one of the modifiers that you actually do have to pay attention to a little bit. It is a 3 out of 10 because if certain enemies are given this buff, they become very, very dangerous, and you will have to properly assess if these enemies have been blessed by this and take them out post-haste. The number one enemy that you need to be focusing on if he is given Cranial Corruption, which seems to happen more often than not a lot of times, maybe that's just, confirmation bias, is the Reaper. The Reaper has an insanely high DPS normally, right? This guy pumps out tons of damage. We've all been in a situation where we've come up close on a Reaper and we're intending to kill him, and he bursts your shields and kills you in a matter of like a couple milliseconds, which is even more often happening on Havoc because you get no protection when your shields are broken. It goes immediately and starts chunking your health. So these guys can be super deadly, and players will be playing cocky. They'll be playing like they have the assurity that, oh yeah, if I just spray some flame staff or use my chorus of spiritual fortitude, all these Reapers and Gunners, they'll stop shooting. They'll just be dazed and confused and running around like chickens with their heads cut off. But this Cranial Corruption buff will keep them in the fight, and it will mean that they can continue just going on you when otherwise they would be stopped from what they're doing. And this is also very annoying when you have like when you're using your chorus ability. Chorus is really the ability that gets hurt by this the most. The chorus ability normally pulses and knocks back nearby enemies and allows you to make a little bit of space, and that is suppression. But this will make these enemies unable to be suppressed by these effects, and they'll just continue to run up and hit you or shoot you from range, and they can in fact even kill you through your chorus. So they can knock you down to 1 HP, whereupon your death prevention will go into effect. That is part of chorus's active ability. So yeah, Cranial Corruption can be really dangerous if you aren't perceiving that, oh yes, there are cranial targets out there and I need to kill them before I do anything risky. As far as unique gameplay, because I will also be ranking all of these in terms of how unique a gameplay element they add to the formula, how much strategizing and difference they make whether they're in a game or not in a game. I would rank this only a 2 out of 10, however. Really not that impactful. As I said before, if this appears on melee enemies, it is almost really not noticeable at all. It is a very slight speed increase. It's really only noticeable when it's on certain ranged enemies, and those enemies will die pretty quickly with most situations. Now, in terms of builds impacted, we're going to be talking about each of the modifiers and which builds are going to be the most negatively hurt by this modifier being in the game. That's what I mean by builds impacted. The ones that are impacted here are melee and crowd control. Because Cranial Corruption stops these enemies from being crowd controlled properly and makes them faster, it is quite a negative effect into them. And the other negatively impacted build here is melee, not only because of that not being able to CC these enemies as much, but they are now faster, and if you happen to have ranged allies on your team who are shooting at them, the bursting of those enemies is actually quite disruptive. It'll throw you out of your position, and it happens a lot. It happens quite a lot because, yeah, it's not uncommon to have someone on your team who's shooting and killing enemies, especially now with like Hive Scum who's just shooting bullets for free. In terms of counter picks, how do you counter this and how do you beat this? It is just simply more ranged DPS, just killing stuff faster. Because Cranial Corruption leaves enemies vulnerable to headshots by giving them all infested heads, really just bring any good old-fashioned blast away weapon and go harder. Leaving enemies alive with Cranial Corruption is the only mistake you can make that will actually like harm your chances of winning. Let us go on to our next one, which is Moebian 21st. Moebian 21st simply spawns additional waves of Moebian 21st soldiers in addition to your normal waves of Poxwalkers and stuff. So Moebian 21st are flak armored, higher health Poxwalkers. They are akin in health and stats sort of to the regular bruisers, like the standard melee enemies. And yeah, they are just kind of cannon fodder. So I'm going to rank these guys a difficulty 1 out of 10. They have no unique flavor or no unique like moves or anything they do. They just act as a way to flood the zone with even more enemies that might take a second or two extra to dispatch. And in that same vein, In terms of unique gameplay, I'm ranking them a 1 out of 10. They also bring nothing in terms of making you play any different. All of your builds that were effective now or before are now going to still be effective. Most builds are bringing something that can deal with hordes, and this is just more horde. So it's going to boost your numbers if you're going for like padding your stats. In terms of builds that are impacted by this, I will say none. Certainly there are builds that like melee builds or whatever that might be like gummed up by having more enemies in the field, but they really don't last all that long. And again, it's just like you're fighting more of normal trash enemies. So I wouldn't say that this is going to adversely affect any particular type of build. The counter picks to this: just more DPS, right? The higher DPS builds you bring, the easier this is going to be, the faster you can erase this entire segment. In fact, Moebian 21st, whenever this is in rotation, it's a great time to climb the ladder because it's pretty much a free modifier. Every good build that is attempting Havoc should have, or at least every team should have resources to just dispatch dense hordes, and this is all it really is. And you can also, of course, stack more AoE in your team, so that means things like Ogryns with Rumbler, Flame Staff, Flamer, Toxin Grenades and Toxin Pistol and stuff for the Hive Scum. Plenty of options in terms of counter picks here. Our next one is Pus-hardened Skin, and this is one of those ones that I think that this might have been removed from the game at this point. It has been a very, very long time since we've seen it. This was in Havoc 1.0. It was right when the Havoc mode launched in December of 2024, I believe. And all this does is it makes the enemies have this sort of green sheen to them. What it is doing behind the scenes is it is giving extra armor against solely ranged attacks, and that is really not all that interesting. It's just it's a damage reduction that scales with the difficulty of the Havoc rank that you're on. So I believe that it's like a flat amount, like a 10 or 15% damage reduction, but it scales as you go up the ranks. And I think this is in part why it hasn't been in rotation, because it makes ranged playstyles completely irrelevant. That is the reason why I'm going to give it a 3 out of 10 difficulty here. In fact, I actually edited here and went and looked it up. It is in fact a 10% plus a 1% per Havoc level range damage reduction. So what you're seeing is at Havoc 40, you are incurring a 50% range damage reduction on any affected enemies. And this stuff is everywhere. What happens with Pus-hardened Skin and many other of these sort of modifiers is that pus is on one enemy, and if that enemy is killed within a certain range of other enemies, it'll splash onto them as well. And that is next to impossible to prevent from spreading. This, there are other horde shooter games where you can isolate certain targets and kill them away from the group. Darktide is not really one of those games. There's no characters who have skills that can like draw out a single enemy and make them die away from the rest of the group, or neutralize their effects before they're killed. And so this is just going to do by necessity spread to all these targets, and then therefore it's going to make all of your range damage just suck into those targets. In terms of unique gameplay, this is just a damage reduction against one type of damage, against range damage, and so it's super boring. It's just going to mean that you have to shoot more if you want to kill the same targets, and so therefore it's going to get a 1 out of 10 in terms of unique gameplay. For the builds that are negatively impacted by this, it is of course just ranged DPS. Notice that I am not mentioning damage over time effects here, because damage over time is still all good. So if you are playing into Pus-hardened Skin someday down the line and you are using a range build, I would highly recommend something like the Flame Staff or the Recon Lasgun with the Infernus Blessing, because those burns will deal full damage, whereas the direct impact of the shots will not. So that could be a good way around it if you're playing one of those classes. For counter picks, just more DPS, right? If enemies are only going to take half damage from your range attacks, hell, just bring a bigger gun. Bring the plasma gun, right? The plasma gun usually just double overkills most small to light elite enemies, and therefore it's still going to kill them in one shot. And then of course you've got counters in melee as well. Melee is not hurt by this at all, so basically it gives melee a free pass. There's one modifier that is on the mission now that is doing nothing to stop melee's damage at all, and then damage over time effects, as I said, are not neutered at all by this. So those are the counters to Pus-hardened Skin. Then next up, and the final one for the first 4 that were released with the game, is the Blight Spreads. And this is the one that is a fan favorite, I'll say. Everybody loves Blight Spreads, I believe, I think is the general community sentiment. And in fact, everybody loved it immediately upon release too. It was definitely excellent, and definitely weren't like 50 million forum posts raging about it. So the Blight Spreads, aka Goop, as I affectionately refer to it as, is when enemies that are killed, and this is again another instance where you'll see that there are enemies that have this sort of green hue to them, which was a oft memed thing in that season 1 of Havoc, where you had 2 different modifiers that were both the enemies kind of glow green, and one of them takes extra range damage to kill, and the other one explodes and puts goop on the floor. This one, same thing. When those enemies are killed, they are going to explode, and they also will douse nearby enemies with this effect, so it'll spread to other affected enemies, and that is obviously naturally going to happen. If you put even 1 or 2 enemies in a horde of 50 poxwalkers, almost every single one of those poxwalkers is going to get affected by it at some point, because they're all bundled so closely together. And when they burst and they die, it leaves an area of effect on the ground of green slime. This green slime corrupts your HP directly. It does not care whether you have toughness. It will directly start corrupting your HP bars, and therefore, if you stand in it at all, it's effectively akin to the game just cheating out damage on you. It is, in that way, one of the more deadly modifiers, because if you are not countering it with one of the direct counter methods, then you are taking guaranteed damage and you're reducing your health bars. And Lord forbid you end up in a situation where you can't escape from it and you end up corrupting 1 or more of your wounds. You are not getting those back unless you use a health station or a med stim. So you will permanently lose that health. And yeah, it's very, very dangerous. It's very, very deleterious to your health. I am ranking a 6 out of 10 just because it is really hard to maneuver around this stuff a lot of times. Playing without one of the counters to it is pretty much just saying I want my game to be super fucking hard, because it locks off big areas. And what it does in terms of like, you know, zoning you is it puts this stuff on the ground that lasts for, I believe, I want to say it's like 15 or 20 seconds. It's a very, very long time. And so it slows the game down a lot, which means that you are standing around waiting for this stuff to clear a lot, and that means there's more chance for stuff to spawn in the game. So yeah, you don't want to walk into it, and on occasion you'll step into it, and if multiple enemies have died in the same spot, it'll actually stack up and it'll corrupt you at a multiplied rate. So you'll immediately just take huge chunks to your HP and perhaps even lose wounds, and it sucks. So in terms of difficulty, 6 out of 10 here. The hardest modifier, one of the hardest modifiers in the game. And in terms of unique gameplay, I'll give it a 4 out of 10 here, because it does actually say, hey, listen, when you are killing these melee hordes, these hordes of stuff coming in, you need to be keeping an arm's distance. This is a direct harm to melee builds. So melee builds, especially ones that don't have very much reach, so like daggers and stuff like that, oh man, you're going to hate your life playing into Blight Spreads, because you have to get up close and personal, which means that when they burst, you are almost guaranteed going to step in this at least a little bit. For range builds, or for, melee builds with a little more range, so like the Force Greatsword Psyker or a lot of Ogren builds, he has a pretty good reach on his melee. Those builds tend to feel a little bit better, although Ogren has a real hard time with this because his hitbox in terms of where he's standing is so much larger. So yeah, melee just has a hell of a time here. Fortunately, there are 2 counter picks. Zealot is a very classic, easy counter pick. He's been the counter pick the whole time. He has his middle aura here. I can't remember exactly what it's called, but it removes 1.5 corruption per second, and this will over time decrease the corruption that you've taken. So you can like step in it a little bit and you will lose a little bit of health, but then he can take that off. And so then from there, you'll only corrupt just the top part of your health bar, and you just kind of need to stay near the Zealot and make sure you don't take too much at one time. However, they have since introduced the Hive Scum, who is a far better counter for this. The Hive Scum has the, what is it called? The med kit, the stim supply kit, that its base effect, even without any stims in it or active, will prevent corruption from accruing on affected targets for the next 15 seconds. I mean, everybody is taking the lingering effect that makes it so that once you touch that circle, you get 15 seconds of the stim buff, and that removes up to 40 corruption over that duration, and it prevents you from taking corruption. This is an excellent counter pick to Blight Spreads because it allows you to just quickly notice that, oh, I have the stim effect on me. You can see the effect on your screen, you can see the buff on your icon bar, and go, okay, I can run through this stuff with complete impunity. And because Stim Supply has such a short cooldown with the way that he is currently built, it's just an amazing counter here. And if you do happen to accrue any corruption, you can always just step into one of his circles and lose 40 of it over time. Bada bing, bada boom, nice. That's the Blight Spreads. Let's go on to my favorite mutator, Heinous Rituals. And Heinous Rituals is very interesting, and I love what they're going for here, although the execution is a little bit flawed. Heinous Rituals has rituals that are placed around the map. They are chosen from locations at random. There are many locations these can spawn in any given map, but not all of them will be active on each individual playthrough. So there is an element of randomness here. And on each map, there are a certain number of them that will be active. I believe that most maps have 4 to 5 of these locations that will be active across the course of the game, and those, again, as I said, you can either have them front loaded, or they can all be back loaded, or they can be spread evenly. You might even get unlucky and have 2 in the same area, but when you stumble upon them, you'll start to hear chanting. It's very faint, usually in sort of contest with other sounds in the environment, but they are very noticeable visually. There's a big green light and a circle of 8 dudes who are chanting and summoning towards the demon host in the middle. And what will happen is, when that is active, when you have stumbled upon it and entered into the threatened range, you'll see a health bar pop up at the top of the screen. And this will progress very slowly at first. You have minutes once this pops up at the top of the screen in order to get to it and defuse it. However, if you push towards it, if you get closer to it, if the game registers that you are encroaching on this ritual, then it will accelerate the pace. And then it will accelerate again as you get within the imminent threatened range of the ritual, and or if you attack the ritualist directly. If you, like, for instance, shoot a stray shot from downtown and hit one of these ritualists directly, it's going to go at full speed. And that full speed is affected by how many ritualists are left alive. So what you'll see is there is actually a mod that you can get if you are having trouble with these rituals that will show you a timer for how long you have left on them, but it is linear. So every ritualist is going to contribute 1 point towards summoning it. So if you eliminate, let's say, 6 out of 8 of the ritualists, you are only going to progress that timer at 1/4 of the speed you would before, 2/8 of the speed, which is very nice. Sometimes there'll be one ritualist who's just in a really bad spot and you can't quite get them. Don't stress yourself out, especially if you have lots of the bar left to go. They are going to be progressing at a very slow rate in comparison to how fast they would be altogether. So a fully aggroed ritual that has the full time to go, if you like aggro it right away, has 30 seconds, but if you quickly kill everybody on the thing except for one person, that will take that one summoner 4 minutes. So yeah, it's not all that threatening unless it is put in a position where you can't get it. And here is the real problem with Heinous Rituals, is there are locations across the various maps which have glitched Heinous Rituals, which will, I feel like for some reason I'm like an inch away from saying anus somewhere in here, but these rituals will be activated as if you are much closer to them than you actually are. You will see them start to go at that really accelerated pace, even though you are nowhere physically near them. And they happen to be a lot of times near choke points or near large enemy spawn points where you are not going to physically make it to these enemies. So remember that you can, of course, shoot the targets off. There are certain weapons, especially weapons with sort of sniper variants, so revolvers and las guns and those sort of things that have precision and deal a lot of headshot damage. Those are very good at picking off these ritualists at range, and those can be used to remove the ritualists without going over there directly and having to melee them. Although for most purposes, melee is your best bet. So yeah, in terms of difficulty, I'm going to rank these 5 out of 10. They are only really difficult when it throws a ritual at you in addition to a large horde or a large enemy force that is going to try and stop you from getting to it. And the really scary situations are when you kind of have to bite the bullet and go in and get the ritual, but you haven't yet cleared your way through the horde, and you have to like commit to one or the other. And these rituals, by the way, I forgot to mention, if you let them summon in, it will summon a demon host, and that demon host is turbo buffed as compared to the normal version of the demon host. That demon host, in terms of how dangerous it is scaled based on the difficulty. So the difficulty at Havoc 40, the demon host will spawn in. Normally, demon hosts in games will kill one of your players and then fuck off to the warp, but at Havoc 40, and I don't know exactly how it scales to lower difficulties, but at Havoc 40, if this gets summoned in, it will claim 4 lives. So it will kill your entire team. However, because it only claims 4 lives, if you happen to be in a really bad situation where you've got a demon host and you're scrambling, but you have a revive point nearby, you can revive players while it's going around and killing everybody else, and then you'll have players left alive at the end, and it'll actually fuck off after those 4 kills are claimed. Although that's not a very common occurrence, you'll get that. But I will rate this a 5 out of 10, as I said, because a lot of times these are left exposed by the enemies, and they're quite easy to dispatch. And then about 50% of the time, the other half of the time, they are in kind of tricky positions that you have to think about, or you have to make some interesting maneuvers to get to. In terms of unique gameplay, this is definitely a big winner. I love these because they kind of force you to be like, okay, well shit, there's a timer on the screen that says we can't just sit here and slowly pick off stuff all day. We need to get in there, and we need to have a plan when we go in. We need to execute this ritual, and then we can deal with everything else. They're very cool in that aspect. They definitely add a different flair and a different challenge that changes the tempo and changes the decision making from just being, hey, more damage is the solution to everything. In terms of builds impacted negatively by this, none, because there are no builds that this directly counters. There's no build that's like, oh fuck, Heinous Rituals on a map, I can't play X build. This is a build independent, debuff. It is just going to make your gameplay harder, your game decision making harder. It's there to increase that, and that is why I love it so much. And in terms of counter picks, the thing that you can use to make this even easier on yourself, sniper style weapons, as I said earlier, las pistols, las guns, the like revolvers, and anything that can shoot with precision and get headshots with big headshot multipliers is going to be great here, because you can pop these guys with pretty good ease. And of course, explosives. So rocket launcher, Ogren with his rumbler, as well as the Ogren frag bomb. A perfectly placed Ogren frag bomb will instantly kill all of the rituals in one of these. So yeah, plenty of counters to it, but yeah, a difficult but also interesting modifier that I like a lot, and it will be sort of the baseline for how I create some new ideas for these modifiers. Let's go on to our next one, the Encroaching Garden, aka pink, aka purple, aka fucking healing enemies. Difficulty 9 out of 10. What is this doing? Well, certain enemies are going to be blessed with this pink buff, this sort of pink aura around them, and it's nearly impossible a lot of times to tell which enemy has it unless you are a mystery channel member and you get access to the exclusive pink eye mod by T-Dops. Then you can see exactly which enemy is causing this aura, but every enemy around that pink enemy within 5 meters is healed. And it used to be that these enemies were healed for a huge flat rate of like 1200 health per second, which was absurd. Now it has been reduced. Carapace, and basically the higher and more armored the enemy is, the less healing they're going to get per second. Carapace is 800 per second, and then it kind of scales up from there. Unarmored and unyielding, like boss enemies, are healed for nearly that maximal rate. But remember that this cannot heal other pink enemies. So the best case scenario is you come across a pack of 3 or 4 enemies and all of them have the pink buff on them, because none of those guys are going to be able to heal themselves or the other allies that have it on them. So that's good. The problem is when you have 1 or 2 of these enemies that are in the middle of a pack of enemies that don't have it, especially if those enemies that don't have it are tanky ones like crushers, like bulwarks, because then we're started playing hide the pink enemy, and it gets very, very hard very quickly to extract that one healing enemy from the center of the group and kill them. And that is why this is a difficulty 9 out of 10, because if, horde spawns get intense to a point where you're being inundated with lots of enemies, a simple sprinkling of these pink enemies will greatly extend the life expectancy of all of their allies. Because in terms of like how you kill them, for most builds, you are killing enemies one by one. And what's worse than a mutant that you have to stab 3 times to kill? A mutant that you have to stab 6 times because it just so happens that there is a pink enemy within 5 meters that's healing them through a wall or something. And this just really means you have to pump a lot more damage, and it can gum up the works and put you sort of behind the curve in terms of outpacing the horde spawns and killing. And this gets increasingly threatening when it on some chance it will actually spawn on captains. It can spawn on there's like 2 different types of captains in the game, and I believe it always spawns on one of them and then has like a chance to spawn on the other one. It can spawn on demon hosts even occasionally. Not that that's ever going to really have that big of an effect, but yeah, these captains are probably the deadliest enemy to have it, because obviously you can't remove them very quickly, so they're just going to have this sort of entourage of permanently healing enemies around them, and it takes a lot of concentrated fire to remove those enemies and make them less of a threat. So in terms of, oops, I skipped over. In terms of a unique gameplay here, I'm going to give it a 4 out of 10. It does encourage you to single target pick high value pink enemies in your combat. There is some target prioritization that is needed here, so there's a little bit of an additional skill curve. But again, we're really not passing in any sort of real cool threshold in terms of anything really unique. It's just like, okay, there's an enemy you really want to kill instead of just really wanting to kill it. But in terms of builds impacted, this is one of the most impactful modifiers. If you are a build that does not have high DPS, if you're a build that is focused mostly on crowd control or damage over time, so Ogryns are very vulnerable to this, where a lot of Ogryn builds are stagger based, and then they will build up bleed stacks and that sort of stuff in order to concuss and finally dispatch the enemies. That sort of stuff is very ineffective against this, because those enemies are going to be healing off most of the damage they're going to take until they reach a certain critical mass of bleed stacks. So you'll have to do a lot more damage to kill it, and it's very hard for a good number of classes to sort of pick that one pink target. So for veterans, no problem usually. Usually the pink target is somebody who you can throw a crack grenade at, or you can shoot with your guns and drop them. That is no problem. But for, the Ogryn, right, he doesn't really have a whole lot of options for precisely taking out that one target, and as soon as the ranks close around the pink enemy, you're going to have to get through an absolute wall in order to take them out. So non-AoE enemies or non-AoE allies are also affected here. The best counter to this, as I said, alluded to there, is that more range damage and more AoE damage are going to be preferable here. So being able to shoot and destroy these targets, because they are quite visible at a range when they're not yet aggroed, these pink enemies, being able to pick them with high single target range damage like a las gun or like a revolver or whatever is very valuable. Being able to snipe these targets when they are exposed occasionally. And then of course AoE is the solution to everything, because hey, how do you deal with a whole horde of enemies that are surrounding and hiding one pink enemy? Well, simply light the entire horde on fire and the pink enemy will die in the middle, and then everything else will die after that. So yeah, just AoEing stuff down just wins here, and that's why against Encroaching Garden, you'll almost certainly want to bring some sort of massive blasting thing like the Flame Staff. So there you go for Encroaching Garden, guys. Let's go on to Final Toll, aka Red Enemies. Final Toll is a little bit interesting, although kind of frustrating. Final Toll is a buff that has no effect until the enemies are dropped below 50% HP. So as opposed to the other modifiers we talked about so far, which affect only certain enemies in the pool, so as opposed to a lot of the other modifiers we've talked about so far, which only affect certain enemies, certain elite enemies, or certain enemies in general are chosen to have these buffs, a Final Toll affects all elite enemies on the map. And because this is Havoc mode, there are a ton of elite enemies. In fact, most enemies that are not summoned in hordes are elites. And when these elites go under 50% HP, they go into rage, meaning they turn red. And this is actually quite a scary, scary proposition. It makes them get stagger and suppression immunity, which is very, very scary. Suddenly, you can't knock these guys out of their animations, and you can't stop them from shooting. They are going to get more hit mass, meaning that your attacks will get stopped on them harder, and they get to move faster, they get a little bit bigger, and they also are going to get more attack speed and damage. So yeah, these enemies get super, super scary. The scariest enemies here, just like last time with the Cranial Corruption, is going to be Reapers. Reapers, because they have a high health pool, a lot of times will get knocked below that 50% HP, and then now you have an enemy who was doing a lot of damage. Now they have even further increased DPS, and they can't be staggered or CC'd or stopped from shooting, and they'll just shoot all day. And that is very scary. The other really, really scary enemy with this is, of course, the Crusher. The Crusher being buffed with Final Toll means he can drop overhead attacks very quickly. Because it increases their attack speed, all of their attacks come out quicker, and so they will drop an overhead and then recover and drop another one over and over and over again, and you can't CC them to stop them. You have to straight kill them. So yeah, dropping enemies low and not finishing the kill is a cardinal sin against Final Toll. Finish your kills when you're playing Final Toll. So that is why I'm giving it a difficulty rating of 4 out of 10. This is very dangerous, because if you are put in a situation where you can't actually finish the kill, you are creating an enemy who is going to be a major threat down the line, namely because of that CC and suppression immunity, because you're going to come around a corner and you're going to see them in your face. You're going to go to like stagger them and get past them, and they're going to say nuh-uh, and they're going to kill your ass. In terms of unique gameplay, I'm going to go with 3 out of 10 here, because it does encourage you to finish your kills and stay on targets until they are guaranteed dead. It does encourage a little bit more commitment to playstyles rather than just kind of like tickling everybody down a little bit at a time. In terms of builds impact here, unfortunately, it's going to have a very negative impact on builds that rely on dealing crowd control and melee damage. The most adversely affected here, as for a lot of these, is going to be like Arbites and Ogryn. You know, these characters rely on crowd controlling the enemies that they are hitting and then finishing them off while they are stunned or crowd controlled. If you happen to go into a group of maulers and crushers and stuff like that, you know, normally an Arbites shield can charge in with hold the line and knock all these enemies down and beat them to death while they're on the floor. But if you got allies who are shooting plasma guns or whatever it might be at this group, and you've knocked them below 50% HP, then your charge in is going to not stagger those enemies, and you are going to take a red empowered overhead in the next millisecond. So you need to be really, really, really careful when you are seeing red enemies, and remember that you are not going to be able to stagger them and stop them from attacking you back. You need to be ready to block or dodge. And this is really the thing here, is you have to commit to finishing your kills. You have to kill these enemies to kill them outright. Fortunately, the counterpick to this is just stacking more and more DPS. You know, most enemies can be killed outright in one go. And the really handy thing here is that when these enemies are crowd controlled, say that you've got a crusher or somebody and you run into them, say with hold the line with our Arbites that we just talked about, and you shove them to the ground, he will not get out of that staggered state as soon as he goes red. Only once he is fully unstaggered and red, then he will get that suppression or stun immunity. So yeah, if you've got enemies who are in that staggered state and then you drop them below 50%, you don't have to be scared immediately. Only be scared once they start attacking again. So you've got plenty of time. If you CC first and then finish the kill before they can recover, that's the way you're going to go about this here. So if you're an Ogryn or somebody, make certain you're using your charges early in the fight, rather than once you've softened them up and turned them red, because then it's going to do nothing, right? So that is your final toll for you. Let's go on to Rampaging Enemies. And this is another one that I think might be dead, might not be coming back. Rampaging Enemies is just a damage reduction. It is a flat damage reduction that it's very similar to what we talked about with the, what was it called? Pus-hardened Skin, where this spreads to nearby enemies. That is sort of going to jump to nearby enemies when they are killed, and it buffs enemies around them when they're killed, and it stacks actually. So every stack of damage reduction can add different damage reduction to different sort of enemies. So for elites and stuff, they can have like up to 25 or 30% damage reduction, I believe. Specials are gonna have 30%. Monsters and like as I said, monstrosities, like big monstrosities, those guys will get 15%, and then pretty much everything else on the map is getting like up to 50% damage reduction. So like the trash enemies, that is really where this modifier adds up and is quite unenjoyable, is because this spreads to all nearby allies. When you have a horde situation, you can't stop them from getting it because it spreads within a 4-meter radius. So you'll kill one enemy, one elite enemy who has this, and then it'll spread to every little shitty nurgling ally who is around them in a huge radius, and then you'll kill one of them and it'll spread a second stack. And this just really increases the health pools, effective health pools of all these little crappy enemies. For elites and stuff like that, because it only gives them a maximum of like 25 or so percent damage reduction, doesn't usually have all that much of an effect, but it really has an effect on making every smaller enemy just last forever. And this combined, if you ever happen to have a situation where this is combined with Moebian 21st, now that is a dense horde, because you have a Moebian 21st who are already pretty high health, flak armored hordes, and then you have Rampaging, which is going to make their health double effectively, which really bogs down that sort of situation. So yeah, this is aka orange enemies, by the way, if you remember it from way back when. This is only 2 out of 10 in terms of difficulty. It is a little bit more difficult than something like Moebian 21st, but it serves a similar purpose. It really doesn't feel like too much different in terms of captain stuff. It does actually prevent like lots of like one-shotting and boss killing potential, bosses or captains can get a pretty good sizable damage reduction out of it, but it doesn't really have much of a tangible effect on anything that is non-horde. So this ends up just gumming up the works for non-horde killing compositions, which isn't really many compositions these days. And this is, in terms of unique gameplay, is again nothing. It's literally like nothing. It's the lowest you can go, because there is nothing you can do as a player to avoid spreading this orange buff to any enemies, and there's no real strategizing you can design in your build or styles you can incur to make this easier on yourself. It's just going to be, hey, I have to deal more damage to this game in order to get through it. And therefore, in terms of builds that are impacted here, I'm going to go again with none. This is just going to affect every build equally, since it's just going to make every horde enemy generally way tankier. It's going to make everything in the game take longer to kill, so everybody's affected roughly equally here. The counter pick, of course, is just bringing more DPS, as it was with the Moebian 21st. Hey, you know, you've got enemies that are harder to kill, just kill them harder, right? That's the only thing you can do, and this is why I think this is probably not shown back up. It is super uninteresting to play against. It is like, yeah, wow, the enemies have more health. Cool. What an interesting buff. Well, let's go past this one here and talk about one that actually is interesting, Contaminated Stims. This is one of the more recent 2 that have been added to the game, and this one had some very fucked up effects for a while. This one will take a little bit longer to explain, I guess, but there's really only a couple of effects you need to be worried about here. So Contaminated Stims, I am ranking this a difficulty anywhere from 3 to 5 out of 10, because there are 4 different flavors of stim that the enemies can choose from, and these have varying effects, and those different effects are not all created equally. The blue stim effect used to make these enemies take less damage and be crowd control immune. That was stupid as fuck and made certain enemies immune. So now what this will do is it is going to give the enemies that are stimmed with blue a higher armor state. It makes them act as if they are in carapace armor, and it gives them just a big damage reduction. And this is a flat damage reduction, akin to what we were just talking about with Rampaging, where no amount of armor penetration or anything like that is going to affect that. So having rending on your weapon doesn't allow you to hurt blue stemmed enemies better. It just is a reduction of the damage you'll deal. And yeah, that's going to make them much harder to take out. This has a greater effect on unarmored enemies and a slightly lessened effect on already armored enemies like Carapace, like Crushers, but it's still very, very steep. You'll only be doing about 40% of the damage you were dealing before, so it can extend their health a lot. If all enemies chose a blue stim, if all enemies were doing blue stims all the time, this would be a 5 out of 10 in terms of difficulty. The other really difficult stim here is the green stim. The green stim makes the enemies take way less damage from damage over time effects. So burning, bleeding, warp, all those sort of effects that are normally going to carry your games, especially with things like the flame staff, the flamethrower, dots from the hive scum, those sort of things are reduced by half, and that is taken off the top. So yeah, if you're attacking like a Crusher who happens to use this, Crushers, because they have Carapace armor, already take a vastly reduced amount of damage over time effect, and this is going to reduce it even further. So really, really unfortunate there. And this also increases their health pool. I believe that the way this works is very similar to the way that the green stim works in-game on the character. Perhaps you didn't know this, but if you have used a green stim recently and you take damage, the stim will actually replace that damage that you lose up to a certain amount. And this is what happens here too, is as you are damaging these enemies, it will actually replace portions of their HP as they take that damage. So not only are damage over time effects going to be significantly lessened against green stims, but they can actually replace that HP as they lose it. And this increases up to replacing 100% of their HP on the higher ranks of Havoc. So this actually makes damage over time builds really, really nerfed, and so this would also be a 5 out of 10 in terms of difficulty if you get it, because dot builds are going to be cucked by this. In terms of the red stim is a really, really damage enhancing stim for the enemies. It makes them get way faster attack speed, melee attack speed. So melee enemies will stim up with this, and this can be quite dangerous. It will make Crushers and stuff like that just drop their overheads or their swings much, much more quickly. It makes them have less stagger, and it makes them harder to stagger, so they will recover from staggering effects much more quickly. Kind of similar to the red buff that we just talked about when we were talking about Final Toll, but they can still get staggered. The thing about red stim though is that these enemies don't get any defensive buffs, so they will still just be killed by regular attacks. And then finally, yellow stim. Yellow stim is very unique in that it makes these enemies much weaker. It makes their weak spot take 4 times damage, so they are incredibly vulnerable to being instantly killed by most range attacks, and they will also get a big increase in their range attack speed. So you have to be on the lookout for gunners and things like that will get this buff, although usually because of that increase to damage taken, they'll get eliminated before they can really do much of anything. But these guys get super scary because they fire massive volleys. I believe it multiplies their volley of shots by like 3 or 4 or maybe even more than that times. They'll fire like 20 plus shots in a burst, and they are going to annihilate you if they hit you with that. Even like individual small gunners are very scary. Like even the non-elite gunners are incredibly scary if they get this buff. But like I said, it's only a 1 in 4 random chance that they get it. And the way that stims work in general is you have to threaten the enemy first. So they don't just have it when they're around the level. You will have to engage the enemy. The enemy will have to be activated and see you and start to attack you. And the first animation they'll do is using a stim on themselves. And then it's only a 1 in 4. Well, it's a bit different depending on the enemy, because some of them don't have certain ones in their pool, but it's only a 1 in whatever to pull that given stim. And by then, a lot of times, because you just engage them in combat, they might already be dead. So a lot of these don't have that much effect. The ones that, and I would rank that like a 3 out of 10 in terms of difficulty, the ones that have a greater effect are the ones that allow the enemies to live longer. The blue stim and the green stim that just prevent all damage in general, and dot damage with the green stim, those actually do have quite a noticeable effect, because they can make certain enemies very, very tanky and last a lot longer and build up in numbers. So you got to be on the lookout for that. In terms of unique gameplay, I'll give this a 3 out of 10. Again, not really much you can do about it, right? It's just going to be like, oh, occasionally I'll need to pull out my sword to kill one green enemy if I'm going Flame Staff Psyker, but most builds are kind of using, stuff that it's not gonna be directly affected by any one of these, and the solution to all of these guys is just to kill them, just kill them harder. So the builds that are directly impacted, the builds that are gonna be hurt by this, really only one build is gonna be hurt by any of these directly, and that's damage over time builds. So really just like Flame Staff kind of, or like, Flame Staff Venting Shriek, like that's the real one build that can actually be hurt by any of these stims, and it's only the green ones. And then the counter picks to that is just more damage, right? Killing these enemies, as soon as you see them stim up, just kill them, right? There's nothing stopping you in terms of killing them outright, and more damage is going to make that easier. So there you go. That's your counterplay, I guess. Finally, Rotten Armor, guys. And by the way, they didn't have Rotten Armor on the on the website in terms of getting its icons. This is what I got for you. This crappy looking thing here. That's how I feel about it. Rotten Armor. We just talked about it yesterday, so I'll give you the briefer rundown on it. These enemies spawn in. It spawns waves of tons of Carapace armor typed enemies. So normally when you get a horde called upon you, it trickles in scab poxwalkers and stuff like that. This actually changes those enemies to being crushers, maulers, and berserkers, the ones in the black armor. So these guys are going to be way beefier than you would have otherwise. So your stage is going to be flooded with many more chunky metal enemies, and these enemies have a damage reduction. At 90% HP and above, they have a 75% damage reduction. So the first 1/10 of their HP is going to take effectively 40% of their equivalent HP to get through. Then 75 to 90%, or 90 down to 75% of their HP, they take 50% reduced damage. Then between 75 and 50%, they take 25% reduced damage. And then finally, between 25% and 0% of their HP, they take 25% increased HP, or increased damage. So that doesn't break even, by the way, to point that out. That actually gives the enemies overall a 45% damage reduction, or health increase. So overall, you'll have to do a 45% more damage to any enemy affected by Rotten Armor in order to kill them. And this Rotten Armor buff also applies to all enemies that were already those types in the map. So if you just happened upon a map that has the Crushers and Ragers and Maulers on it already, then all of those guys are getting this buff as well, not just the additional ones spawned in. So typically this is better when the waves that are spawning in are accompanied by, shotgunners and bulwarks who don't get this buff as the normal enemy spawns, but occasionally the normal enemy spawns are just more of this shit, and then you're just going to get overwhelmed. So this is, apparently also it makes these enemies move slower, but I don't think that's true. It doesn't feel like it anyway. It also makes these enemies burst when they die, and they put down a gas cloud that is hard to see through, and if you step into it, you will take damage to your toughness and then to your health if you have no toughness upon breathing it. So yeah, this is a insanely difficult modifier. I am ranking it a 15 out of 10 in terms of difficulty, because yeah, this is one of the most screwed up in terms of balancing modifiers I could imagine in the game. It will just print hordes and hordes of heavy armor and shove it at you. You keep in mind what we've talked about so far, just small enemies having medium damage reductions, enemies that literally will have no buffs on them until you activate some requirement, and only then for like a brief split second they'll get some buffs. You really have to kind of stumble into about half of these and make the gameplay harder for yourself. This one has the absolute potential, very high potential, to end your game if you are not bringing your absolute best and counterplaying it, because again, these are Carapace armored enemies. In addition to all that damage reduction these enemies get, they of course are also Carapace armored, so you will have to bring something that can counter armor. You cannot be coming in here with your non-armor penetrating weapons and hoping to survive. You just won't. So that means it's going to be the most insanely difficult modifier in the pack. And in terms of unique gameplay, however, I'm going to give it a 2 out of 10. Again, there is nothing interesting or new on the face of the earth in terms of this modifier. It is simply just Crushers, Maulers, and Ragers, enemies we've already fought before, who have extra damage reduction. They are going to be harder to kill. And so what terms of gameplay or unique gameplay does this draw out of you? You just have to hit the enemies more, right? You just have to hit the enemies more. In terms of the builds that are impacted here, this is by far the most negatively impactful modifier in the list. All non-meta builds are extremely penalized when playing against this. And by that, what I mean is if you are not bringing your most high damaging, high crowd controlling, armor penetrating set of weaponry, and also horde, AoE splashing set of weaponry, you are going to be incurring a really bad time. This is not the modifier to be running if you want to be playing your Katachan Devil's Claw Zealot and just trying out and seeing if you can solo. You'll be there all day. I mean, you can do it, but it's going to be hell, right? You want to bring the meta stuff, the dueling swords with Uncanny Strike, the Power Sword Mark 6, the Plasma Gun, the Flame Staff, the Rumbler, RBD's Shock Maul, like the stuff that is powerful in order to counter this, because it is not pulling any punches, neither should you. In terms of counter picks, as we said before, more DPS, right? When the modifier is just going to print enemies with more HP and give them damage reduction, the only counter to that is to deal more damage to make them dead. And the other thing here that's quite good against these is crowd control. Crowd controlling these enemies, will actually hold them up long enough to kill them, because they have so much HP, they can actually pose quite a threat in terms of getting on top of you and overrunning you with their absolute mass. You need to be able to stop them in some way, shape, or form generally, and so that's where crowd control comes in. Just pray to the gods you don't get rotten alongside Red, alongside Final Toll, because then you're just going to get completely overrun and not be able to crowd control them, which sucks. So there you go, Rotten Armor. And let's go on here, now that we've covered all 10 of these, and you can let me know in the comments what your favorite one is, but I don't think any of them are all that interesting, and I'm hoping that in a few days here I can pose something more interesting to you as an alternative. So let's take a look at this little graph here. Now, I am by no means a Sheets or Excel expert, so I couldn't figure out how to label each of these points, but I'm certain we can remember what they were. Down here on the x-axis, we have the unique gameplay axis, and then over here we have the difficulty axis. So I'd like to point out something, is that, and remember, this is completely subjective, but I think that most people would generally agree with me, in terms of unique gameplay, in terms of modifiers that actually force you to think outside the box or bring alternate builds or use different strategies, almost nothing exceeds the 4 out of 10 mark. Only Heinous Rituals, in my opinion, goes above and beyond that call and does something that is actually remarkable in that category. Everything else is very uninspired. Almost all of these, if we look back across all of them, have a counterpick of more DPS, right? Just adding more damage is how you kill these, right? Blight Spreads and Heinous Rituals being the two exclusive ones where you cannot just simply DPS your way out of this. You need to strategize, and you need to build or select around it, and note that their unique gameplay and difficulty is relatively high, but almost everything else here is just going to come down to, hey, you'll need to kill certain enemies first, or you'll just need to kill everything a lot harder. And that is what has led to this this sheet here, where we can see that I ranked a lot of things very low in terms of unique gameplay, because I think that almost all of our modifiers here are just DPS checks. They're just saying, hey, do you have enough damage to kill these enemies now that they have 15% damage reduction? Okay, what about 50% damage reduction? Okay, what about if I print like 100 more of them, right? And that's all it is, right? In a game mode where we already have that as part of the increasing scaling modifiers that Havoc has at a baseline, it's really boring and unoriginal. And then in terms of difficulty, also note that a lot of these are on the low end of the spectrum. We've got a good cluster right here. This cluster down here, two of which are just Rampaging Enemies and Pus-hardened Skin, and then Moebian 21st, right? A lot of these are just enemies that take a little extra damage, and that's it, right? That sort of stuff is always going to rank super low in terms of difficulty and in terms of unique gameplay, because it literally asks nothing out of you other than to attack more in order to have higher damage stats on your weapons. That's it. So yeah, that sort of stuff can really never have a chance to shine. In terms of higher difficulty, you know, of course you see there is a slight correlation here in general, a little bit in terms of unique gameplay does tend to pull more difficulty. There's a very, very light correlation. I believe I plotted it at some point. It's something like this. But I imagine that the correlative value, like the p-value or whatever you would call it, statistics nerds, let me know in the comments, is like super low here. But there is some sort of correlation between, you know, having unique gameplay and difficulty, because having to kind of wrap your mind around another modifier that does something interesting and makes you have to make decisions and choices, that is a powerful thing, and that's what Havoc should be. However, most of them are just, here is more enemies with more HP, and you know, you need to attack harder in order to win. And that is the ultimate thing I wanted to show here today, guys. So hopefully you learned a little bit about the different modifiers and how to counter them and what their deal is. But the ultimate thing I hope you come away with is that none of these are really all that scary or interesting. You just, in terms of how to tackle them, hey, just bring your A game, bring your best and strongest build that can do the most damage, and that's really all you are going to be required to do in most situations. Almost none of these require any special tact or skill at all to counter, and I think that's a big flaw that I'll address in a couple days. So anyway, if you watched thus far, thank you for making it here. Like and subscribe if you want to catch more videos from me about this topic and more on Darktide, and appreciate you for watching. Bye-bye.